I work at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. We have a hypothesis about the nature of consciousness. We fully accept that the neuroscience perspective is probably right. There are neural correlates of consciousness. But we take a second step and say, we also hear from a lot of people about mystical experience now and throughout history and psychic experience and all these things suggesting that consciousness is actually non-local. Non-local in a quantum sense. That means that it exists before space and time, or at least that it transcends space and time. So people have been reporting these kinds of phenomena forever. And what's important is that they can be studied using scientific methods. The very same methods that are used in other branches of science can be used to see whether or not somebody actually has a telepathic experience or has clairvoyance or whatever. They're all testable, and they have been tested for 150 years. When you look at the overall database, it's very difficult to reach a conclusion that these things do not exist. To put it in a positive sense, they do exist. And they're using the same methods used in every other branch of science to figure out whether they exist or not. So, because these phenomena exist and all of the evidence suggests that these are not in space-time, you can't have precognition and think about it in an ordinary way. And even something like clairvoyance, you could have clairvoyance of something happening on the other side of the planet. Well, it's hard to reconcile that this is electromagnetic or that there are signals passing or anything of that sort. And they've been tested to see whether we're dealing with something like ordinary signals. And it doesn't work. It's something that appears to be before space and time. So that's why we have this hypothesis that consciousness appears to have at least a non-local capacity to it. Some element of it is non-local. This is one of the reasons why when you think about our knowledge pyramid and we put consciousness below physics, it means it's before our concepts of space and time. So a lot of our research then is looking at how do we understand the nature of that kind of awareness more? How do we get better evidence for it? What do we look at the consequences of it for health and healing and psychology and all the other things? That's what the Institute is focusing on. The idea of non-local consciousness is not very popular within mainstream science, at least not yet. We believe that eventually it will be. In fact, we believe that it's the future of science. It's not just about consciousness, but about the physical world, that there are elements that are non-local. We know that from quantum mechanics, but we think it's much bigger than the way that mainstream science is thinking about it right now. If you spin it out into more pragmatic uses, like who cares about non-local consciousness? In terms of things like technology, we don't know yet. We can make up ideas about non-local technologies, but we don't really understand it very well. But we think probably the biggest change would be about changing our view of what we think consciousness is. And the reason that becomes important is because if we imagine that we are machines made of meat, which is a way of thinking of it in a neuroscience perspective, then machines don't have meaning and purpose. It becomes very quickly devolves into a nihilistic universe. So everything is pointless, there's no meaning, who cares about machines? And you can make a case that if you look at the way that society has evolved, people kind of are machines. And we're using the planet up in a way that is similar to how we might treat a robot. You turn it off, and if it's broken, you throw it away and get a new one. Well, that's not sustainable, among other things, and it leads to huge inequities in terms of how people think about themselves and what others are worth compared to what you think you're worth. Well, if it turns out that that model is wrong, that maybe we're partially machines made out of meat, certainly if I go to a surgeon, he's working on a meat machine, but maybe it's more than that. Maybe there is something about these notions of non-local consciousness, which is what the mystics are always talking about. If that's true, then suddenly ideas like meaning and purpose may be able to come back into our way of thinking about the nature of physical reality. Just like I have meaning and purpose in me, I do things because I feel that they're meaningful, well, I also have awareness. If that awareness somehow is linked to purpose and meaning, then suddenly we live in a purposeful universe, the complete opposite of nihilism. And in that kind of a universe, the possibility of praying for peace and making it mean something actually is possible. So there's a pragmatic reason for doing a tweak on our philosophical understanding of what do we think we are, which ultimately is all about what do we think consciousness is.